Time now for the week that was. Let's take a look at the top stories that made headlines around the globe this week. Russia's President Vladimir Putin says that Western weapon supplies to Kyiv would only escalate the conflict in Ukraine. His comment comes a day after NATO leaders announced security guarantees in Lithuania. Mr. Putin also warned against Ukraine joining NATO, saying it would threaten Russia's own security and raise international tensions.
As for Ukraine's membership in NATO, we said this a number of times. This creates threats for Russia's security, obviously. And one of the reasons for the special military operation is the threat of Ukraine joining NATO. I'm convinced that it won't improve the security of Ukraine itself. And in general, it will make the world a lot more vulnerable and will lead to additional tension on the international stage. As for the security, we said this a number of times. Any country has a right to ensure its own security. And of course it's entitled to choose the way to achieve this goal that it considers to be the most suitable. There's only one limitation: ensuring one country's security should not create new threats for another country. We hope that this principle that has been declared a number of times in various international documents will be taken into account. Ukraine surely has the right to ensure its own security.
Meanwhile, U.S. President Joe Biden vows to protect every inch of NATO territory. He made the comment as he met with the leaders of several Nordic countries in Finland. There they discussed the war in Ukraine and other issues. Speaking at a news conference with the Finnish president, Mr. Biden declared that Russia's President Vladimir Putin has already lost the war in Ukraine.
The answer is Putin's already lost the war. Putin has a real problem. How does he move from here? What does he do? And so the idea that there's going to be what vehicle is used, he could end the war tomorrow. He could just say, I'm out. But what agreement is ultimately reached depends upon Putin and what he decides to do. But there is no possibility of him winning the war in Ukraine. He's already lost that war. There is going to be a circumstance where eventually President Putin is going to decide it's not in the interest of Russia, economically, politically, or otherwise, to continue this war. But I can't predict exactly how that happens. My hope is, and my expectation is, you'll see that Ukraine makes significant progress on their offensive, and that it generates a negotiated settlement somewhere along the line.
Very interesting developments coming, out of this NATO summit that happened, of course, this week. And I think the 2 points that really stand out for me, one is a lot of people have been wondering if this was the time where Ukraine was going to join NATO, especially looking at the war between Ukraine and Russia. But President Joe Biden has come out to say that the war in Russia needs to end before they can even think about adding Ukraine into the alliance or even consider adding Kyiv to its ranks. But what has gathered a lot of reactions is the fact that even with President Joe Biden coming out to say that it might be a long while before they can join, he has also provided munitions, cluster munitions, and sent it to Ukraine because with the reason being the fact that they're already running low on ammunition. So it's like, okay, they're putting one leg out, but kind of just putting one. They're trying to help them, but not necessarily, come into any kind of conflict directly with Russia. Very, when we look at the dynamics of it all, very interesting. And this, of course, comes off the back of even Turkey, Turkey and Hungary that have tried to join, but of course have been held back by Sweden. A lot of negotiations and politics going on behind the scenes. But what's really important, at this stage is just looking at the effects that the war has caused. When we look at the war between Ukraine and Russia, we're looking at the numbers put out by UN. We're seeing the numbers of refugees going up. We're seeing women and children being affected, lives and property being destroyed and lost left, right, and center. Absolutely. So what really needs to happen is a ceasefire, conversation, dialogue, and if the U.S. president has said that they will not be joining NATO. I wonder what the future of for the Ukrainian country and, of course, for Vladimir Zelensky is at this point.
Well, I mean, Shaitan, you've said it, you've broken it down, but the future for Ukraine is to find peace, which is a bigger neighbor, Russia. I don't think that peace will be found if you are going cap in hand to the U.S. and to the West, to Western governments, asking for support, for money, and for ammunition. You can't be in that quagmire and expect that there will be peace or that the war will end anytime soon, which of course also speaks to the doublespeak of Mr. Joe Biden, and the American hegemony. When you say that Putin has already lost the war, and that Ukraine can join NATO until there is peace. I can't reconcile the two. If the war has been won, as they would love to believe, by Ukraine, then how come they're not being admitted into NATO? They know that will escalate the conflict, tensions, and that it will not be acceptable in any way, shape, color, or form to Russia. Trace the history of NATO to 70 years of its existence. It's essentially about the power play between the US and the Western countries, and of course Russia. As at that time when it was formed, when NATO was formed 70 years ago, it was against the Soviet Union. Okay? Soviet Union was dismembered. You know all the stories and all the countries that came out of it. But then Russia is still standing, very strong as a military and economic power base, particularly in that part of the region, which is why so many countries are still suffering the effect of the Russia-Ukraine war. I'm not so sure if America and its allies in NATO are looking for peace between Russia and Ukraine. And I don't know why, after 70 years plus, it's been so difficult to talk with Russia, or at least to accept the demands of Russia as to what might constitute existential threat to it. I think in modern history, the only president that has managed to get that done, interestingly and intriguingly, was Donald Trump. For 4 years, there was charming kind of relationship with Russia. What went wrong? Could we in any way trace it to the underhand dealings, allegedly, you know what I mean, from the house of the number one man in America, and the Russian government as far as oil deals and everything is concerned? We don't know. But then, of course, this is a big international power game. I don't think that they are eager to find peace anytime soon, which is a shame on the whole world, because as far as this law is, continues to be prosecuted, people will suffer.
Yes.
Death, destruction, and I don't think that Kiev will be smiling anytime soon, no matter all the
ammunitions that are sent from the US
to Zelensky. Is it a joke to him? We know that he has interest in the joke business, but this can be about joke.
Definitely not.
All right, we proceed. The National Assembly has approved the $800 million World Bank loan request for the federal government to deal with the effects of the scrapping of fuel subsidy. It has now emerged that President Bola Tinubu plans to pay 8,000 naira a month to 12 million poor and low-income households for 6 months. Our rights correspondent, Omo Bazuayi, reports that Parliament also permitted the president to convert another 500 billion naira from a supplementary budget initially approved for 2022 for the same purpose.
Months after the Ninth National Assembly refused to approve the $800 million World Bank loan for former President Muhammadu Buhari, President Bola Ahmed Tinubu resubmitted the same request to the 10th Senate to cushion the impact of its fuel subsidy removal. Buhari had sent the loan request to the National Assembly with barely 19 days to the end of his administration, but the lawmakers failed to act on it before the end of their legislative tenure in June. According to Tinubu, the disbursement of the loan is to provide safety net for vulnerable Nigerians and to ensure the transparency of the process. Tinubu, in a letter read by the President of the Senate, Godswill Akpabio, on the floor, said digital transfers were made directly to beneficiaries' accounts and mobile wallets.
Approval of the request of Mr. President has been granted by the Senate and will now be communicated to him.
The program, which is expected to stimulate economic activities in the informal sector, improve nutrition, health and education, targets at least 12 million poor Nigerians as beneficiaries. Tinubu, on his inauguration day, announced the removal of fuel subsidy, a burden, he said, government can no longer carry. In the same vein, the president requested the National Assembly to allow him convert another 500 billion naira from the 819 supplementary budget for 2022 to alleviate the effects of subsidy removal policy. The president could not withdraw the money from the service-wide vote and could also not forward a fresh supplementary budget of his own, as he was yet to constitute his cabinet.
The palliative component of that particular bill was 500 billion. That is to cushion the impact of the oil subsidy. Because, you know, Mr. President, from what we understood, believed that we can delay gratification for a greater gain tomorrow.
And it is to this extent the President looked into this document and agreed that the supplementary budget of 819 be amended to take care of some of these palliatives. And as such, he went into the document and reordered. And that was where this said 500 billion is coming from.
The sum of 185 billion is to be channeled to the Ministry of Works and Housing to alleviate the impact of severe flooding experienced in the country in 2022. The amendment also sought to allocate 19 billion naira to the Federal Ministry of Agriculture to ameliorate massive destruction of farmlands across the country during the severe flooding experienced last year. The breakdown further reveals that 35 billion will go to the National Judicial Council, 10 billion to the Federal Capital Territory Administration for critical projects, while the remaining 70 billion will be given to the National Assembly to support the working conditions of new members. After hours of deliberations, the National Assembly approved all the requests of the President. With these approvals, hopes are high the Nigerians will, in a matter of time, begin to feel the impact. Omo Bazwai, Arise News.
Also, Nigeria's President Bola Tinubu has declared a state of emergency on food security. It's in response to the rising cost of foodstuff. Special advisor to the President, Dele Alake, announced measures to reverse inflation and ensure future supplies of affordable food. State House correspondent Adesua Omoruan reports.
It is no longer news that Nigerians are grappling with high cost of food items. While availability is not an issue, it has become increasingly difficult for many to afford the hiking prices. The president's decision to remove subsidy on fuel has further aggravated an already precarious situation. To reverse the trend, President Bola Tinubu has declared a state of emergency on food security and announced a series of initiatives aimed at ensuring uninterrupted supplies of affordable foods for ordinary Nigerians. Among the key interventions are the immediate release of fertilizers and grains to farmers and households to mitigate the effects of subsidy removal, while the central bank will continue to play a pivotal role in funding the agricultural value chain.
Accordingly, and in line with this administration's position on ensuring that the most vulnerable are supported, the President has declared with immediate effect the following actions. 1, a state of emergency on food security. 2, that all matters pertaining to food and water availability and affordability as essential livelihood items be included within the purview of the National Security Council. As with most emergencies, there are immediate, medium, and long-term interventions and solutions. In the immediate term, This government intends to deploy some savings from the fuel subsidy removal into the agricultural sector, focusing on revamping the agri sector.
The message is that middlemen who have kept all these grains, because we'll be releasing everything we have in stock. So the message is that middlemen and those who are storing these things to create arbitrage and get profits, this is the best time to release it quickly, because once we release those paddy and the maize that the central bank has, you know, your prices will be depressed.
In addition, the government plans to establish a national commodity board that will monitor and regulate food prices, ensuring fair pricing for consumers.
Through this board, government will moderate spikes and dips in food prices. As for storage, existing warehouses and tanks will be revamped to cut waste and ensure efficient preservation of food items. This government says it's going to do away with the old ways of livestock business. So livestock business is holistic, whether herders, grazers, whatever.
Efforts to facilitate trade and increase revenue from food and agricultural exports are also highlighted. The government aims to streamline customs processes and reduce transportation costs, benefiting both producers and consumers. With these interventions, the government hopes to not only address the immediate crisis, but also create employment opportunities in the agricultural sector. However, Nigerians eagerly await to see the implementation of these initiatives, hopeful they will bring more affordable food items for them. From the presidential villa, Adesua Omoruan, Arise News.
All right, I mean, two interesting developments during the week there. The president's intervention in the agri, value chain, and of course, the 500 billion naira palliative, the request, which has been granted by the National Assembly. To take it from the rear, I'm not a big fan of that cliche. State of emergency. I don't get it. I think that is old journalism, to be saying that the president has declared, or that, the president should declare a state of emergency. If the idea is to show how important, how dire the situation is, I can understand it. But then, yes, as dire as the issues in the agri-value chain might be, would that be our biggest problem today as to warrant a state of emergency? If it is one of the top 5 or top 10 of the issues that we are dealing with, how many state of emergencies will the president, have to declare to show how serious, he is? So I'm saying that in communicating for government, there are things that you can communicate to show that, yes, the president is concerned, and then he has reeled out a number of measures, policies, inclusive for the short, medium, and long term, to address what is happening. But to say that he has declared a state of emergency, what will happen to the state of emergency if nothing changes? If a basket of tomato is about 8,000 naira, it's the same, 8,000 that you are trying to pay, to people. So the intention might be good, but the communication is faulty. State of emergency. Did you declare a state of emergency, for example?
Insecurity?
On insecurity, which is a bigger thing, because how will you even get to transport all these things, store them and transport them to the end users if the people that will deal with them are not secure? As we are seeing in Plateau, as we are seeing in Benue State, which we'll soon talk, speak about with the Senate Minority Leader. So I think that we, it will have to be a lot tidier how the policies and intention of the government is communicated. Brilliant idea that, we shouldn't starve and we need to put attention on agriculture at a time that Nigerians are obviously struggling. But to say that it's a state of emergency, have you declared it in the education sector, where you are trying to, bring up some loans to students? Have you declared it in the oil theft, area, where you are burning a ship that has been stealing oil for years, in the Niger Delta? So communicate well, present logically to people so that people can follow. As to the 500 billion naira from 2022 Appropriation Act. I think it's supplementary budget, which is basically, what the president has done is to reorder that budget because it really can create a new thing. It's about one of the measures that is left with to do, and it has to be done. How much of it will really go down, percolate down the line is what we will have to wait and see how the implementation works. But every money, everything that you can throw into it to mitigate the effect of the policies, as brilliant as they might sound, will be welcome. But I think that NGOs, media, and public analysts should look closely at what has just happened. The 500 billion for the people we can understand. But how did the Senate, arrive at the additional ones, which were not necessarily part of the initial request of the president? Of course, I'm talking about the 70 billion to members of the National Assembly themselves from Appropriation Act. 35 billion naira to the judiciary, NJC in particular. I mean, people, of course, will have the right to begin to wonder, to say, oh, really? Even after the president has just granted their request of changing the age of retirement from 65 to 70, 35 billion, from supplementary budget is now going to the judiciary, 70 billion going to the National Assembly. We can understand the 19 billion going to Agric. The additional 200 billion outside of the 500 billion that the president intended should go to the people. How justifiable, frankly speaking?
I mean, you've really highlighted on everything, and I think what we're seeing here, of course, is the consequences of the removal of fuel subsidy. The president trying to step in to mitigate those effects with, of course, this 500 billion naira. And I think at one point I would just really like to focus on, because we have this issue of a trust deficit in Nigeria as it stands. A lot of people are even looking at this in government. And a lot of people are looking at this 8,000 naira that's supposed to be going to 12 million homes as, okay, will it really get to these people, and how much of an effect would it have? And I saw this letter that was put out by SERAP, which is the Social Economic Rights and Accountability Project, where they urge President Bola Ahmed Tinubu to use his good offices and leadership position to urgently publish details of spending of about 400 billion that has been saved as a result of the removal of fuel subsidy. So it's not just about removing it and saying, oh, we are taking care of it. We want to see in detail exactly how, if we're going to suffer the effects, then let us know exactly how this savings is going to affect us. SERAP has also urged this current administration to provide details of the plans, of course, including specific projects on which the funds will be spent, and the mechanisms that have been put in place to ensure that the savings are not embezzled. Because it will be very sad if we go through all of this and the reason why this subsidy was removed in the first place is not achieved. We have to move on to the next story, but I think that's very important. Let's that money not just disappear all of a sudden.
I'm not so sure if the money being saved is something that you will have in a pause, somewhere, because the government will readily tell you that the reason why states and the federal government are sharing more money and will share more money, from federal allocation this month is because they are not being used for subsidy. And therefore, states will get more money, as they did get, for June. Definitely. So you can say that the 400 billion being saved, is already going to federal government and to many of the states that they are sharing, in the hope that, like the federal government is trying to do, every state governor will also use the additional money they are getting judiciously, which is why people are saying on social media, ask your governor.
Ask your governor, hold your governor
what they are using the extra money for.
All right, then let's move on to our next story. Also this week, former President Olusegun Obasanjo took a swipe at members of the National Assembly. Obasanjo, in calling out the lawmakers, said the outrageous salary package and humongous remuneration was neither constitutional nor moral. According to Obasanjo, salary allocation for elected officials is the responsibility of the Revenue Mobilization Allocation and Fiscal Commission, which he said the lawmakers had jettisoned to fix salaries for themselves. The former president spoke in Ado-Ekiti during a colloquium to mark Areafe Babalola's 60th anniversary at the bar. He argued that nobody would appreciate democracy until it had impacted positively on the lives of ordinary people. I mean, this in itself is a no-brainer. And then we're beginning to see, I think, a lot more people, of course, starting with former President Olusegun Obasanjo, trying to make sure that the Freedom of Information Act is used, appropriately. A lot of times, when we are, even in doing interviews myself, and I've tried to get a few members of the National Assembly to say, okay, exactly how much, is the salaries? How much are you getting? It always seems like a game of cat and mouse. We can't get an exact figure, but we do know that when we look at the outrageous monies that is being spent in such cases, it's no wonder that the former president has come out to say that it's something that we need to look at. We can't continue to be insensitive, But in that light as well, there's also been a train of thought that has come out to say that there also is the package, or when ex-presidents and ex-governors, when they exactly, when they have those, if you're pointing the finger to the National Assembly, there are three fingers pointing back at yourself.
Yeah.
As a former president yourself, are you willing to let go of the pension package, which a lot of people have described? I mean, when you even think about it, we say retirement, but a lot of these ex-governors and ex-presidents move on to, really the ex-governors move on to other roles in the Senate, or even end up as ministers. So how can you be, it's almost like it's a double package. How can you still be in government actively and also collecting a pension package? So I understand that this in itself
that won't apply to President Obasanjo.
No, of course. I'm talking about the fact that even though he's pointing at the National Assembly, it doesn't end there.
No, it doesn't.
We need to look at other angles of government so that we can cut the cost of governance, especially now at a time when Nigerians are feeling the brunt of the removal of this fuel subsidy. Very important observation there by President Olusegun Obasanjo, but then also the implementation is very, very important.
Absolutely, Sheyiton, but we can't agree more with President Obasanjo as far as the constitutionality of fixing salaries, remunerations, and emoluments of public officers. It is the responsibility of RAMFAC. It is not the responsibility of National Assembly. The Constitution is very clear.
How did we get to a place where RAMFAC has not been able to, use its space as the ones that are supposed to set the salaries for the National Assembly? How have we gotten to this place?
That is the question, but I don't think that we will achieve much if we're looking back. Let us look forward and let us know the position of the current administration in what President Obasanjo has raised. And we are seeing it again, just like we just discussed, in the reordering of the Appropriation Act of 2022. The President requested that you move 500 billion out of the 819 that was meant to be the supplementary budget, specifically for palliatives because of what has happened. But guess what? The National Assembly, which fixes its own salaries, now say, let us dash, 35 to NJC, 90 to agree, blah, 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 and 70 billion to themselves, especially for those who are just coming in newly. To do what? To buy houses, to buy cars, So people will ask that if ordinary people are getting 8,000 and it won't go around, there are people, less than 200 of them in Nigeria, who have said bring 70 billion. Bring 70 billion out of the money. That is the heart of what President Obasanjo is talking about. RAMFA should do his job. Let us know the position of this administration as far as other arms of government fixing their own salaries is concerned. All right, we proceed. The Emefiele saga continues. A high court in the Federal Capital Territory has ordered the Department of State Services to comply with another court's decision restraining it from arresting the suspended Central Bank governor. The ruling by Justice Bello Kawu comes barely 24 hours after Justice Hamzat Muazu of a sister court had ordered the DSS to, within 7 days, charge Emefiele to court over his alleged crimes or set him free.
as at 29 December, and that judgment therein asked DSS not to arrest or detain Mr. Godwin Emefiele as at then the central bank governor on trumped-up charges of terrorism financing. That judgment is still existing. That judgment is still subsisting. The SSS or the DSS has not in any way appealed that judgment. They have not in any way obtained a stay of execution of that judgment. So Emefiele, by his lawyers, had come to this court to do what? Ask for enforcement of that judgment. And that is what the judge has ruled today by saying, you have to do what? Release this man or charge him to court within 48 hours.
All right, so the saga continues. About 6 weeks after.
Yes, he was arrested on June 10th, I think, yes.
Yes, the 10th. Okay, so about 5 weeks, and he's still there. I think it was important that that clarification came first, from the court to say that if you can be using his detention to look for reasons why you have detained him for more than 4 weeks. Charge him to court if you've found something. It looks like DSS, hacking to the voice of reason by the court, and now they are now saying this is the reason why we have held him, and this is the reason why we're charging him to court. Possession of illegal firearms, how many rounds of ammunition, things like that.
Economic sabotage and national security, amongst others, is one of the things that they had mentioned.
Well, I mean, it has to end up in court. You can't be keeping anybody and then be looking for reasons why you are keeping him. I don't think that anybody will raise any issues if you have to go to court and prove your case. But I think that this government should be very careful in how they deal with the Emefiele issue, deal with the Bawa issue, and deal with people who have served their country, and then you are now hounding them. Yes, it is important to bring people to book and to justice, but do it without infringing on their fundamental human rights and according to the rule of law. That is essential, because power is transient, and what you do today, that has been used, to go after people, you do not know how clean you will be and what will happen, when you are no longer in power.
Definitely. Very quickly, I mean, it's up to the accuser to prove exactly what the accused is being charged of.
Who alleges must prove.
And, like you've rightfully said, I mean, in no way, shape or form does it make sense that you arrest somebody and then it's after the arrest that you now start looking for, evidence to make it stick. But just to quickly highlight exactly what the charges have been brought against him, they did mention terrorism financing, fraudulent practices, money laundering, round tripping, and a threat to national security. And those are very, very, heavy charges. So it's really up to
which will have to be proven.
Which will have to be proven, of course. It's up to the team to make sure that if we are going to say that he's done these things, they need to prove it. But in the meantime, there have been reports even saying that, of course, I mean, if you think about it, just being in custody for 4 to 6 weeks, that will take a toll on your mental health, on your physical health. And this is somebody that was the CBN governor for time. So seeing that the High Court has ordered his release, believe that they need to listen and of course have him out as soon as possible.
Our case is also there too.
Of course. Well, that's all of the week that was.